I'm pretty sure I remember getting sent like some of your music a few years ago, on like Fool's Gold and stuff like that. Like,
yeah, I love those guys, man. That was kind of my whole scene when I first started really thinking of myself as a professional, was that in the US there was this sort of hipster blog scene, and the Fool's Gold guys and the Mad Decent guys and myself. I was in Chicago. There were people like Flostradamus and, all that. We were all just kind of hanging out on a single message board, and that's how all that got started.
Which message board was that?
We were on the Holler board.
Oh yeah. So was that Diplo's thing? Because he had that Holotronics thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it was Diplo and Low Budget. They just had this shitty little forum. This was even pre-blog when it started.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember those days. Like, I kind of remember, because I started going to, like, play at places like Ultra, but so long ago now. Like, I think the first time I came was, like, 2005, maybe.
Okay.
And then a couple of years after that was when the whole, like, blog sort of electro thing started happening. I remember going to see, like, Justice play on, like, a little roof party there and stuff, and it was really kind of low key still. Their following was sort of growing, but it was still kind of like a kind of small thing, I guess, and it really blew up from there. And I think I feel like those sort of things are probably the seeds of like the US EDM boom, kind of like initially like Daft Punk playing at Coachella. A lot of people talk about that as like the kind of one of the really like seminal kind of early moments. And then I think, Justice kind of coming through was probably a big one as well, because I think it kind of sort of connected like rock music and dance music. It was kind of huge everywhere, that stuff, really. It was really exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the next generation, that's what it did, because that's, I think, exactly what you said, connecting rock and dance and all that. I think that's what acts like, the Prodigy and Chemical Brothers did for people in the 90s.
That's kind of like where, because I was like a young teenager in the 90s. So I was like, that was completely my route into it. I was basically massively into like Nirvana and bands like that, and then I found Chemical Brothers, Prodigy, and just the fact that they were using guitars kind of like opened me up to them a little bit. And then I kind of completely left rock music behind, really, because I was just getting, I don't know, I was sort of getting more of what I wanted from dance music, I guess, like the kind of the rhythms and things like that. I was so much more excited by it. I guess it was a newer thing, like it felt super exciting.
Yeah. I mean, it was for me too. And I think it was, I didn't realize this at the time, and I don't know if you had a similar experience, but I think for me, when I look back, I was into all different kinds of music, and I still am, but it's the energy and the way that the music makes me feel that I think I'm addicted to, rather than a certain sound or a certain aesthetic or, a certain scene. I sort of, after a while, figured out that really actually didn't mean that much to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's interesting for me, kind of, because I think so when I was like at school and stuff, basically I felt like music was much more tribal when I was growing up. And I think that has something to do with the fact that we were still buying records. And if you wanted to, like, if you were into drum and bass, it was kind of hard to, for example, it was like hard to have a collection of that and UK garage or all the other sort of stuff that we were listening to at the time. So you kind of ended up really specializing. But I think also there's like...
When you say it was hard just because physically it's expensive to buy all that vinyl, or would people judge you?
Yeah, I was thinking about like the financial side of it. I think also just like having the level of knowledge as well, because I don't know if this is interesting to your listeners or not, but it's kind of like, I always find it like fun thinking about what it was like, because it was just so totally different to how it is now. Like, it's just having the knowledge about a genre was kind of difficult because there wasn't like any kind of online resource about like what labels were releasing what.
Right.
So it was kind of all, from like frequenting record shops and kind of going to raves. It was basically much more like place specific. And, even when I started DJing, you'd sort of meet people who like, and you would sort of be included in that because I was like starting to travel around and stuff. And people would kind of make pilgrimages to cities or parts of the world just to sort of hear a certain type of music, which is pretty mad thinking back on it.
Yeah,
like you could literally only hear a certain drum and bass tune if you like flew to London and went to like certain few nights to catch like certain few DJs. And that, there's certain DJs that I followed when I was growing up who were literally, they'd have a tune on dub plate that I'd really want to hear. And you kind of knew that if you called that specific DJ, you might hear that tune. Right. I had no idea what the tune was called or any way of identifying it as well. So it was kind of like really cool in a way because it added so much more mystique to the whole process. Like it was really exciting in a way because like when you finally, sometimes you'd be in a record shop and you'd get given a white label, you'd put it on the deck and it would be that tune that you heard like 6 months ago or probably a year or even 2 years ago and you still don't know what it was called. And it was like incredibly exciting.
Yeah, well, and especially I think for the UK and sound system culture and jungle and drum and bass culture. I mean, that dub plate culture was such an integral part of it. And we're talking about pre-digital era, right? So it's, like you said, a dub plate, it's a physical piece of vinyl that maybe there's only one in the world, maybe there's only 5. And,
exactly.
And that scarcity, man, that scarcity, I think, is something we don't really have anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of really cool. I mean, there's something amazing about it. I think there was like, people were starting to use some digital technology, like as in they'd bring in the tunes to be cut on DAT tapes, which are like a form of like digital tape, basically. Right. But literally, it was a complete start of it. And I mean, all the samplers they were using were all like early sort of digital machines because there's no such thing as a sort of analog sampler. But I mean, it's really like the cusp of this. I mean, I guess the internet was around in the 90s, but it was like so kind of, it wasn't connected to music in the way it is now, remotely.
Well, I mean, we started off talking about, the Hollerboard and these sort of early online communities. When you were coming up, did you have anything, either whether it was online or even local, like a record store or a certain night, did you have any of those sort of gathering places where it felt like kind of everyone was there at the same time, everyone was coming through?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think those things are super important. Like that's happened to me at different times of my sort of development in different ways. I think, when I was like going to like listen to music, like me and my friends would be going to the same kind of club. So we'd be going to Bagley's, which is a warehouse in King's Cross, which is just down the road from where my studio is now. But it's now like a really upscale kind of like shopping area sort of thing. But then it was just like these beaten down warehouses where they used to have raves in. And there were a lot of weekly nights in London at that time. That was kind of a thing that doesn't really seem to be that popular these days. But like there were loads of weekly nights. Like there was one called Movement, which is a big drum and bass night in sort of from the 90s into the noughties. Yeah. That a lot of us used to go to. But yeah, then later, I mean, when I started releasing music, like some of my flatmates were used to go on like Dogs and Acid, which is was a well-known drum and bass message board from that sort of time, which is still around actually. But I must say, I never really liked the forum culture that much because I think I just saw... I never really got into it. And then I kind of also really saw like the negative part of it. You started to see, I remember on Dogs and Acid seeing some DJs like arguing with people on the forums, for example.
Yeah, right.
About, I don't know what the reason these arguments would happen, but I just felt like that's not a classy move and I kind of don't want to be doing that sort of thing. So but yeah, I mean, I think forums are amazing, but I think they also have they have sort of good and bad points. I think you really need like having sort of points for like musicians to gather really helps to create sort of musical scenes, you know, and going back to talking about dub plates, I mean, there was a place on Holloway Road called Music House where all the jungle and drum and bass DJs used to cut their dub plates, and that was a big gathering point, which is a little slightly before my time.
Well, people would, from my understanding, I've heard people talk about Music House before, and I mean, it was, we're talking sort of everyone at the time, right? All the big names, and people would sort of correct me if I'm telling this story wrong, but my understanding is people would wait in line outside and you'd sort of hear the dub plates that were being cut, and you'd hear this music that you couldn't get anywhere else. And then, some big name legendary DJ would walk out with their, one copy of the dub plate. It sounded like a really amazing scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. I think if you weren't a big DJ, I think it must have been tricky or just like time consuming, because I think as far as I could tell, what used to happen is when someone big arrived, they'd sort of like jump the line kind of thing. So
right.
Sometimes you'd be like waiting for ages while like a huge DJ cut all their plates. I guess like it must have been kind of tricky, because there must have been a certain amount of people asking to cut stuff, and maybe you not wanting a certain DJ to cut your plate too soon. I don't know how people used to navigate that, and that being in person must have been so much trickier. But yeah, I mean, and also like actually getting the music is such a hassle, because literally sometimes it was a case of, like one DJ has got your DAT tape, so you've got to like drive over to him to get the DAT to give it to somebody else, basically. Right. So you had to sort of physically ferry these like little tapes around, which is crazy thinking about it now.
It's so weird, yeah.
But I think like I've definitely had moments like later in my career where I've either had I think I've always like really benefited from having, communities or sort of people around me, and what sort of midway through my sort of career, me and Chase and Status, Nero, Breakage, and Casper, and Shy Effects, actually, we all had our studio in the same place. And that was a really amazing setup. This was sort of happened for a few years. And that really kind of allowed us, we all kind of really bounced off each other in terms of like, I think we were all starting to like do different genre music at the time. So Nero were making drum and bass, and then they kind of got into making dubstep, and Chase and Status had started making dubstep, and I'd done some bits and bobs, and it was just a really nice. There was a real good sort of exchange of ideas, and everyone was like encouraging each other to sort of like take risks and kind of do different things. So that was a super exciting time, and really kind of. I think it's just good where you get these sort of situations where you've got a bit of kind of competitive, friendly like competition between artists, Also, lots of people used to come through there. Like I remember Sonny Skrillex coming through there a few times to, I remember when he was like working on the Promises remix.
Oh, sure.
With Nero next door, and just thinking, wow, that sounds insane.
Well, and how cool and how inspiring this goes back to the dub plate thing we were just talking about, for you to hear them working on that song that then goes on to become this anthem that I think most dance music fans hear. And at the time, just to hear it and to think, wow, this sounds new, this sounds exciting. I have to imagine then you go back to your studio and that's just fuel, right?
Yeah, massively. Yeah, no, I think it's always a really healthy sort of situation to be in, and it's just exciting timing. I think with, it's never really like a scene I was like super involved in, but it was interesting seeing all these guys being completely at the forefront of dubstep sort of exploding.
Sure, yeah. Well, and it's interesting
2010s.
because I think, obviously, dubstep born and bred in the UK, but I feel like artists from the UK have such a different relationship, and especially people who maybe started in the drum and bass scene, because now in the US, dubstep has become something totally different and it's taken on this life of its own. Did it feel like at the time, those early dubstep years, did it feel like it was sort of supplanting drum and bass? Did it feel like drum and bass was in sort of a lull? Because my understanding is that there was some friction between sort of the old guard and the new guard.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I felt like threatened by it. I think that a guy I used to live with, old friend of mine, was going to like all the really early dubstep nights. So he was going to Forward at Plastic People, and I think the DMZ nights were at Mass. Basically, he was kind of like right on the cusp of it, and as just someone like into the music, and he's buying all these like now sort of seminal early like DMZ 12s and stuff. And to be honest with you, I wasn't really that sucked in by dubstep at that point, because it felt kind of, I think because it was so early on in its development, it felt kind of not as like the production wasn't as hi-fi as drum and bass at that time. And it was also really dubby. I guess it just wasn't really my taste at the time. But I mean, looking back, there's obviously, those people were making some real sort of like kind of new sounding music, which is always like cool to witness. I guess, so I was a little bit slow to kind of get into it basically. And I think I started to sort of get the appeal of it a bit more slightly later when it sort of started sounding a bit kind of bigger sounding, I guess, like in terms of the bass lines and things like that.
Sure. But Flux Pavilion turns it into something totally different.
Yeah, exactly. I remember meeting Flux actually, like as he was like a student at, I was DJing at the university he went to.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, gave me a CD or something. And he was quite memorable because he had like blue hair or something. And
of course.
Yeah, probably he still does. He lives quite close to me now, actually.
Oh, does he? Yeah, I just had him on the show a couple months ago.
Oh, cool. Yeah, lovely guy. Guy. No, Flux is great. So I think I kind of got more into it at that point and started making a couple of things here and there. But yeah, like I say, it's never really been like a mainstay part of my sound. But it's amazing to see like what's happened with it in the States. It's a huge kind of part of the dance music scene, I would say, in the States. Do you still think it's that?
Oh man, yeah, it's crazy. It's really big, but it's turned into something totally different. And I think what I feel and what a lot of my peers and people I talk to feel is that it's cool, but it's sometimes hard to relate to for those of us who started kind of from the roots we've been talking about this whole time, because it really has turned into something else. Like I think for the current generation of kids, like the current 16, 17-year-olds, it's almost like their version of metal. And
yeah, definitely, man. I totally see dance music as this generation's version of metal, like, because it was something that I was like into when I was like super young. I remember like getting like a Guns N' Roses cassette.
Oh yeah.
And just like that kind of like really over the top sort of like hair metal, huge stage sets and stuff like that. I felt like there was real parallels with like how sort of big EDM got.
It's totally hair metal, yeah.
and the sort of just the excess of it, like the stage sets. And I mean, I think it's kind of amazing that it got that way. Like it's mad to think, back going back to like, sometimes I'll like flick through old photos and like I came across some pictures of like how ultra was when I first went, and it's so different now. Like
just in terms of the craziness, the size, the scale, of the
production, the amount of people. Yeah, I mean, it's just grown exponentially, basically, and like in terms of like how it just looks so much more kind of polished and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I think, for all of us who do this for a living, that's good news, right? That's the sign of popularity and health and potential. But
absolutely. Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think we've been talking about all these sort of nostalgic memories of a time when it felt really like a community and it felt small in a way, and it, maybe felt familiar and comfortable. And I think that's maybe what a lot of people from our generation, I think we're around the same age. I think that's for me what I struggle with is now, where do I find that sense of home, that sense of community,
Yeah. I think I'm like lucky because I think there is still that kind of slight kind of like scene sort of feeling within like sort of drum and bass world. I think I really sort of reacted against that a little bit for a while, because I kind of felt like when I was like growing up listening to it, I think one of the things I sort of picked apart and didn't want to do was like I didn't want necessarily the music I was making to sound like it was influenced by other drum and bass. So I think one of my main kind of goals, like in terms of like how my music sort of came across, was just to basically sort of bring in a lot of other influences. So I listened to a lot of like house and techno and stuff like that, and other electronic, and I just kind of wanted to, that's for a long time been something I wanted to sort of I've always tried to sort of incorporate ideas from those type of genres more in drum and bass. So I think I also was like also reacting against the kind of thing of like, you have to just play drum and bass in your set, and that sort of coincided quite well with like how, like I was describing at the turn of the last decade, a lot of us were kind of playing these much more like mixed sets.
Sure.
I think I do think that's kind of changed though. I've definitely gone back to playing more just drum and bass and halftime. I think there's like, it's kind of tricky because I think it's like, whilst I like the sort of freedom of being able to play multi-genre stuff, I think that people kind of want to hear you play a certain thing, so I sort of wrestle with that a little bit. I'm not sure.
Well, sure. I mean, if when you were starting out, I mean, I'm thinking about your first album now, and there were many different genres and styles on that album, and I think it's worth pointing out that at that time that was not as common as it is now, right? Especially for a scene like drum and bass, and I mean, it's just interesting to think about the push-pull between how do you feel free as an artist and not feel like you have to do what somebody's telling you to do or you have to fit in with a scene, but still sort of tell a story and give your perspective in a way that people can follow it and connect to it, right?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think like definitely when I'm doing like live sets, that's when kind of the multi-genre thing, makes complete sense, because it's like, why would you, like if you're trying to sort of take people on like a bit of a journey with an hour's worth of music, like it's madness to think that you just like stay at exactly the same tempo. It's kind of crazy in a way. So I think that variation is important, but I think with like the latest album that I've done with Wilkinson, I think we've struck a good balance, because like the stuff that we have made at a different tempo for it is largely kind of breakbeat based, which is has a lot of, when you start using breakbeats, it kind of really links to drum and bass because the beat patterns are the same. You're just at a different tempo,
right?
And I think like that was quite sort of figuring out that would tie in well with the other stuff we were doing was nice to know, like I think there's a lot of we were also yeah, just inspired by those kind of like acts doing stuff with breakbeats, like people like Prosper or Bicep or lots of other people. But yeah, I think now when I do other genre stuff, I just need to sort of want to make sure that I feel like it really connects to the drum bass stuff I'm known for.
Sure. Yeah, you got to tie it all together, right?
Yeah, I think I'm also tempted to start an alias to do some more house music, because I've always kind of like made a lot of house music, and I kind of feel like maybe that's something that I need to separate. You know, I've never really felt the need to do aliases before, but like I think the way people listen to music now, I think it kind of helps to sort of label the different projects that you're doing, so that people kind of know what the theme is.
Yeah. Well, and I think theme is a great word for it, right? Because it's not just about a sound with a name, but it's, I think increasingly more and more, and you've always been really good about this, but I think all artists are starting to realize that you kind of have to build a whole world around whatever the project is, whatever the concept is, right? So a sound, a name, that's great, but then also the aesthetic, the visuals, what does it look like? What does it feel like? I think all of that is becoming more and more important.
Definitely, yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I think that, like, going back to what we were saying about Justice, they were like one of the first people I saw that, I think a lot of those, actually lots of French producers seem to be amazing at doing this.
Yeah, they really are.
Kavinsky, Gestafelstein, obviously Daft Punk. It's kind of like super important to brand things in like a consistent way, I think, to kind of give it more of like a visual identity as well. I think that really makes sort of projects like albums really special when you can do that.
I think so too. And I wanted to talk about, as long as we're talking about Portals, the album, the design on that, I wanted to ask you, the visual aesthetic, the graphics, crazy to me. It connected strongly with me. This crazy visual. I really loved it, and I wanted to ask you, how involved are you in sort of these concepts? Who did you work with to put, the aesthetic, the graphics of the Portals album together?
Yeah. So thanks, man. I always like enjoy getting really involved in the artwork side of the process, but I work with some really talented designers. So I've worked with these guys called Big Active, who are like a UK design agency, they sort of represent a bunch of different designers. But the guys I work with there, we kind of there's always a lot of back and forth with us about kind of concepts and stuff, but I worked with them on the Taurus album as well, which I thought was going to say,
because that it had a similar, like, very simple but strong aesthetic. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think I've worked with them on a lot of design. I mean, I'm trying to remember what the process was behind this. I mean, I think we basically they do, particularly Matt, who I work with at Big Active, is like, he does a lot of collage stuff. So I think we kind of we basically started off, wanting to get something that reflected like the sort of sound of the record a little bit. So basically using like sort of organic elements, like natural looking elements. And we came across this kind of like idea of like using like doorways and that kind of inspired the album title. And I just like this kind of idea that you just kind of come across these like sort of portals in different places. It just sort of felt quite like a nice analogy for what like the escapism of listening to music is like. Sometimes you kind of.
I love that, man. Are you a sci-fi guy? It felt very sci-fi.
Yeah, big
to
time.
Me.
Big time, yeah.
What's your touchstones? Like your baseline sci-fi references?
I actually only just read this, but I really enjoyed June recently because there's the new reboot coming out.
Yeah. Incredible.
So I read that. I finally read that recently. But I've read a lot of other Frank Herbert books. I mean, I don't think like my dad had a big collection of sci-fi novels from the 70s, which all look amazing because they've got these kind of like painted covers. And a friend of mine pointed out to me that might well have sort of inspired my development. I do tend to sort of like use a lot of kind of quite sci-fi sort of sounds and titles and ideas and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I always find that super inspiring to kind of go to and get ideas from. And
am I right that Time Warp, the early song from you, actually samples? Is it a Star Trek sample?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I just saw that randomly when I was reading about you earlier, and I thought that was great.
I wasn't really like ever that into Star Trek, but I think I was like just desperately trying to find somebody that's saying Time Warp in like a cool old film voice. I seem to remember a friend of mine from America helping me out, sending me some samples for that. So
that's great, man.
But yeah, man, no, that it's yeah. How about you? What are your sci-fi go-tos?
I mean, yeah, I'm a big nerd over here, man. I mean, Star Trek for me is a big one. Like Next Generation in particular is
right.
kind of a Bible for me. But I mean, I consume all of it, man. I mean, I just saw, I don't know if this is over in the UK yet. It probably is. This new show called Raised by Wolves. It's the new Ridley Scott, the dude who did Aliens and all that.
Oh, wow. No,
it's
I haven't
amazing.
seen that.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
HBO, cool. Which I don't know what HBO is over there, but
yeah, I think I don't know if basically the HBO shows go to different channels over here. I think whoever successfully gets them over here will show it. But yeah, that's cool, man. I'll seek that out for sure.
Yeah, I'll shoot you a link after we're done, man. It was really, really amazing and kind of in the vein of what we've been talking about, sort of this crazy visual landscape.
Yeah. I think like a lot of the books that I read that I kind of liked sci-fi wise were probably like almost sort of on the edge of like sci-fi / like dystopian fiction. So a lot of them are kind of like thought experiments about what would happen if, similar to like Black Mirror, like what would happen if we rated everybody or...
Right. Yeah, kind of Philip K. Dick. Was that one of your guys? He's got some great stuff along those lines.
No, I'm familiar with his stuff, but I don't think I've actually ever read any of his stuff. Yeah, like 2001, obviously. Yeah, so many, man.
I love all that stuff. Were you into it as a kid? Were you reading those books as a kid, like your dad's old novels?
Yeah, I think as a teenager, I was sort of discovering it, and yeah, just really liked the kind of, just the kind of how it makes you think, you know.
And it's escapism again, right? Because I heard you use that word before, and I think. For me, I'm a huge escapist. Like that's kind of my default leisure activity is escaping into something. And I've always been that way. I don't know if it's been the same for you.
Definitely. No, I one thing I really would love to do is do more stuff with VR. And I just like, because I kind of love how immersive it is. I think like some of... I get really, really excited when I've been to sort of like shows, like electronic music shows, where the visuals are like a big part of it.
Right.
Like I felt really, really inspired coming back from Glastonbury last year, having seen Chemical Brothers play, and followed by there's an amazing stage that they just started at Glastonbury last year, which was. Created by the Block 9 guys, who are sort of like UK set designers.
Okay.
Trying to remember the name of the stage, but it was basically like a huge kind of sculpture of a head on its side. But it was just it was like a kind of huge art installation in the middle of a festival at night. Yeah, stuff like that really, really excites me. Like I think always like doing the live shows that I've done in the past, and that's the type of thing that I kind of want to keep developing. And maybe I sort of want to. I just kind of. I'd love it if the sort of world of VR was like more evolved than it is now, because I think it'd be amazing for kind of. Well, it is amazing for really immersive experiences, but I sort of. And I'd love to have some kind of part in designing something like that, like, you know, just like making some sound for something.
Yeah, it's too bad that it's not quite there yet, you know, because I think 2020 would have been the year when...
I know. I was sort of hoping that everyone being in lockdown would sort of suddenly make it really take off. I think the thing is, having like played around with it a little bit, there's some really good software, but there's not loads, I think, having... Like I'm completely not an expert, but
me neither.
I think like one thing that's quite interesting is like, how do you walk around? I was chatting to a guy who makes VR stuff, and he was saying that like one interesting idea they had was getting the player to like move their arms to like simulate walking. Obviously you can't. Because at the moment, a lot of like VR games, you have like the player has to have like a stationary perspective,
right?
Because there isn't like, people are trying to develop like technology where there's like treadmills and stuff,
right,
where you can move in every direction. But as you can imagine, that's really hard to do. And like, would everybody have that in their house? Probably
yeah,
not.
Exactly.
So.
It's really weird to think about trying to make a mass application for that. And I mean, actually for you, you know, you mentioned your live show, and I think for anyone who knows anything about you, your live shows are fairly, a big part of it. They're well known, this crazy visual aesthetic, and just sort of a famous part of what you do is the live show. Is it weird to put out an album like Portals, something you spend a lot of time and care on, and then not to be able to go out and present it in a live setting? Because I have to imagine when you guys started, you were probably thinking about the live show, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, me and Wilkinson, you know, we've done a lot of back-to-back DJ sets together, but we haven't like so far like planned a kind of live show for the record. I think because I don't know why, I'm not sure, but I guess because we've had our own commitments and things like that. So I think it's definitely something we had in the back of our minds to do, especially if it went, you know, if we deemed it like a successful project. I think that we yeah, it is a bit weird. It's kind of liberating in a way though, because I think what this year's really done is it's kind of like helped me to there's a big, when you're producing dance music, you're kind of constantly thinking about like, how is this going to go work in the sort of places that I play, you know, how's this going to work in a club or a festival or something. And it's really good for the evolution of the music to not think about that, because if you're constantly trying to make bangers, it doesn't make for very interesting music sometimes. So I think also with the album, we were sort of trying to get away from it being a purely club album and make it a bit more sort of home listening in places. Or just like, we were trying to make it a kind of range of like the most sort of like chilled stuff we do through to like the really sort of harder sounding stuff.
Did you guys have that idea? Was that sort of your mission statement before the pandemic?
Yes. Yeah. Luckily, it was quite good timing in a way, because basically, yeah, we had this plan of sort of making it like more of a kind of, an album that would work as a kind of like listening sort of journey before this whole thing hit. But I think it's, I do think it's really good. I mean, obviously there's some horrific things about the pandemic, but in terms of like, I think sort of a kind of reset, if you are a producer, you know, it can be quite an interesting time, I think.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, it certainly very quickly, to me at least, exposed what didn't have a lot of depth, because I think when we're in the system that you were talking about, when it's, you make the tunes for the festivals in the summer and it's this sort of just revolving routine each year, that it's possible for someone to kind of game the system to just make those festival bangers and then not have a lot else going on behind it, or not have thought or meaning behind it. And I'm not talking about anyone specifically, but I think when the pandemic happened, a lot of that got exposed, and a lot of that very quickly became apparent. That's like, oh yeah, we didn't really need that.
Yeah, I guess this is what, like, when I go to America and I'm like listening to other people's sets, sometimes it kind of, going back to what we were saying before, it does make me feel like slightly old, because I think there's a certain amount of like, because I think the way that everyone is DJing is like super exciting, but it's also like, it's not really kind of you're not really giving enough space for tunes to build and stuff like that. Like I sort of personally find it really satisfying when I'm listening to something that's like, there's like a 4-minute build up or something. That's really cool, I think there's a lot of room for that, and just being taking a few more risks in terms of like structure and the way sort of sets are put together. I think, there are obviously some artists that do very much do that, and I guess more like progressive kind of house people like Eric Prydz or Deadmau5 or something would do stuff like that. But I sort of feel like there's maybe a case of like some younger DJs are trying to get as much reaction as they can constantly, and I sort of feel like after a while you get a bit numb to that, like I'd prefer it to be kind of crazy reaction in the first piece of my set, maybe for a bit, have lots of tunes coming in and out, and then have a section where it's much more sort of elongated and more chill and like sort of, you know what I mean? So there's just more peaks and troughs, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, did you, either now or earlier on in your career when you were starting out, did you feel pressure, or did you sort of struggle with people wanting to put a label on what you were doing, or expecting something out of you that you maybe didn't want to give exactly?
No, I don't. I don't think I have felt like that much pressure really in that way. I think probably a lot of producers are like this. You put a lot of like self-imposed pressure on yourself to kind of like do different things and develop and stuff like that. But I guess in the last few years I've just thought a lot more about trying to make my sets sort of sound like a bit more like have kind of more peaks and troughs and have a bit of a journey. I guess I've been like that about that for a while, but I think it's I think that's an important thing to think about. And I think it's just good to sometimes, like this situation we've had, kind of get away from thinking about what's going to work in the club the best, and just try and think about what is like a vibey piece of music to listen to.
Yeah, well, I mean, what is your life like right now? Your day to day, it's got to be a strange thing to, put out the album. And I mean, obviously, you guys did a live stream, or you're going to do a live stream for it. And I'm sure you're doing other promotional activities. But yeah, I mean, for you this time, now that the album's out, has it, other than what we've been talking about, that you feel a little more free creatively, or you can kind of reassess, what is it like for you right now? What are you focusing on? Are you working on music every day? Are you taking a break?
Yeah, basically I'm in the studio like most days of the week, and it's been good because I've sort of basically been able to get more of a kind of more of a like a consistent sort of routine going, because like when it's mad just like thinking back about traveling and DJing stuff, because you're kind of like traveling over the weekend, then you get back at the start of the week, and then you're like straight back in the studio normally. So it's really intense. Like, and I was sort of basically just working every day of the week sometimes.
Did you start feeling burnt out at a certain point, or even looking back? Do you think
I definitely have, like years ago. Yeah. I think when I finished my second album, I took some time out from the studio, and then I kind of changed like all of my sort of setup as well at the same time. So I kind of moved to using Ableton from Cubase and like started just producing on a laptop, and sort of changed all my studio. So I've now got a lot more hardware in the studio. So yeah, I have had moments where I've sort of stepped back a bit and like, taken my foot off the gas for a minute. I think that's good to do that now and then. I think it's good this year for, obviously it's important to look on the bright side. There are stressful aspects to the this whole pandemic, and I think that there's certainly a lot of anxiety in the background, because we don't know how long this is going to go on for. So it's not all, sometimes it's a bit sickening when people who are creative are just saying like, I just do creative stuff during the lockdown. But I think right. It does really help. I think it sort of took me a couple of weeks after we were in lockdown for the first time in the UK to really relax and started like kind of getting into being productive again. So it's definitely been up and down, but I think it has been quite a good enforced break for a lot of us who were traveling a lot. But now everyone, I'm really keen to get back on the road, and I think it's probably going to be quite overwhelming, I think, playing again. Because you're just not used to that like crowd energy. I'm just about to go to New Zealand soon to play some shows.
Oh, really? You're going to get to go, man.
Yeah, I feel really lucky, man. The only downside is that you have to quarantine in a hotel room for 2 weeks.
Right.
Which is crazy.
I've got a buddy who's in, I think he's in Taiwan right now. He's doing an event out there, and it was the same thing. He had to go 2 weeks early.
Man, it's crazy. But I've got like a couple of friends out there and stuff, so I feel, and it'd be amazing to be somewhere that's like in summertime and is corona free.
Yeah, I mean, the worst places to be to spend 2 weeks in the New Zealand, man.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. I'm really looking forward to that, and it's going to be amazing to play some shows again. But like I say, I think it's going to be quite hard. It's going to be quite mad. Like suddenly, that I wonder whether like real like nerves will kind of come back, because that's something I remember when I started playing out, being really hit by nerves and like thinking, I don't know if I could actually do this for a job, because
oh wow,
it's so stressful to get up and perform and stuff. But then after a few, that completely kind of wore off, and then I was sort of able to really deal with it. I don't know, have you found that? Did you kind of get really nervous when you were playing?
Yeah, I mean, weirdly, the nerves kind of came in midway through for me, when I think I was just too, I just didn't think about it when I was really young. I mean, I started DJing at period when I was like 15, 16, and I, doing house parties and local raves and that sort of thing, very small stakes stuff.
Yeah.
But, and I guess I sort of just got comfortable on a small level, but it wasn't till, but then once it became my job, and it was, and it started being every weekend, the nerves kind of came in later for me. And every once in a while, like still, I don't know, it still happens to me, but it's random. I can't really predict when it's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. I sort of know what you mean. Just to clarify, I'm kind of the same as you. So I was playing at like friends, like colleges and stuff like that, like really little things, or like if a friend had a party, I'd DJ at it. But like, so I wasn't getting nervous then, but it's when I started to play under the name Subfocus and like people were coming to see me.
Right.
That was when I started to get nervous, I think. I don't know why that would make it worse. I guess it was like suddenly there were like hundreds of people rather than like, 30 people or something.
Sure.
So
well, and like, suddenly all the attention is on you. It's like placing a value judgment on you and your art, right?
Yeah,
as opposed
I don't know.
To just sort of keeping the party going.
Exactly, yeah. I guess I don't know why. I've never really analysed why it kind of got worse, but I think, it definitely did for a short period, sort of early on. But I guess it's like everything, like you kind of adjust to different levels of stress in different jobs, like if you're public speaking which by the way I find is completely different to DJing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
One doesn't qualify for you for the other, unfortunately.
No. Yeah, not at all.
But you sort of adjust the levels of stress in those different areas, and I don't find it like a stressful thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in your
anymore.
daily life, do you like to be around people? Do you like to be by yourself? You strike me as maybe more of an introvert.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, I'm somewhere in the middle. I'd say that I'm like not sort of dangerously introverted, but I definitely am like
dangerously
happy.
I like that.
I mean, like, because I know lots of other producers who are extremely introverted. So I think there's kind of there's massively varying levels, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely like, again, it's kind of good for this sort of period. Like I like having time on my own and stuff. So
yeah.
Probably not being as hard for me as like some people maybe.
I'm sure that's true. Yeah. And you just made me think of something you said earlier when we were talking about the forum culture, and you were saying there were some sort of toxic elements there where, people could talk to you. People could it was this direct connection of people's, people could say whatever they wanted without sort of connecting to the human behind the comment.
Yeah.
And that to me was sort of a predictor of what we're living in now, right? The social media universe. And
it's so, I'm like so fascinated by what's going on at the moment. I mean, I'm kind of horrified by the sort of like post-truth sort of world, basically.
Yeah.
And it's a really big topic, but I guess the issue on forums and stuff like that is that you're sort of basically doing all your like interactions under an alias. So there's a sort of like safety blanket of anonymity that you have. So it kind of allows people to be more sort of like potentially be like a bit more toxic than they would be normally if they were just having a face-to-face interaction. And then there's it's interesting but also kind of scary what's happening at the moment with lots of people kind of just I find it mad like how kind of polarized people's like political views are at the moment. I mean, it's especially evident in America right now.
Yeah, man.
And yeah, I'm probably opening up a massive can of worms by talking about this, but quite crazy.
Anyone who listens to this show knows where I fall on the political spectrum, man. I mean, we're in like full on crisis over here.
Yeah, it is mad. I mean, I just can't quite believe that that the sort of people still disputing the election result.
Oh man, it's absolutely insane. I mean, it's
because there's literally zero truth behind it.
Yeah, literally none, man. I mean, Trump has just been, we don't have to go too far down this road, but my thing about it is like Trump has basically just been gaslighting the entire population of America for 4 years, and he's been undermining American institutions and trust in those institutions. And so now, especially for people who are fans of him, what he says seems as true as anything else because he's been telling you nothing else is true for years, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting sort of situation. I mean, I guess, like in general, you're just sort of thinking, are we sort of not able to? I sort of feel like I used to sort of think there was such a thing as like a kind of commonly held truth. Do you know what I mean? And it feels really weird that doesn't seem to apply anymore. I don't know whether things will like start to kind of normalize a little bit. I guess I just feel like people sort of discovered that you can lie and succeed. And then that sort of means that if you don't have much morals about, if you're okay morally with doing that, then you can kind of gain power by doing that. I find it just kind of unbelievable that so many people are doing
well,
that.
it's the perfect storm, right? Of that, exactly what you just said, mixed with the social media environment that we were just talking about, where you're shown only what you like, and there's the echo chamber effect, all this stuff. Everybody knows what I'm talking about here, but it's the combination of those two things that, and the companies that run social media are totally unregulated, and, they're just trying to keep people on their platforms, and it's not really about public good at this point.
It's really hard to know. I'm just like obsessed with how you fix that problem at the moment. Because the elections happened and I've been following it really closely.
Right.
It's something that I keep on like turning over in my mind. I obviously have no idea.
Oh, but same here, man. I mean, I'm.
It's just an interesting problem, isn't it, that we all have of like trying to reconciling everybody's sort of beliefs to being like sort of broadly sympathetic. Because I have no problem with people who have more or less right-wing beliefs, but I think when it starts to stray into sort of like things that aren't true, then it's just like there's some issues. Like, and also people must be experiencing this within their family units quite a lot. Like,
oh man,
maybe their older relatives are Republican and they're not, and that's kind of, I feel like now, maybe years ago, that didn't cause such sort of big arguments as it does now for some reason. I don't know why we're
well, again,
like
man,
so far apart.
I'll blame social media again, man, because I think it's just raising the temperature on every interaction,
Yeah. I think the thing is that it's like when you kind of figure out how to sort of game social media, you realize that like being controversial is like so much more sort of effective for clicks.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'll tie this back into what we were talking about with the pandemic and EDM and all that is, it's the same thing. People have been, artists and musicians have been able to game that same system. And it's only when the system breaks down like it has this year that we can kind of actually analyze it and see like, oh, this person is legit and this person is not.
Yeah. I've got to say, I never really liked that because I kind of feel that I want artists to be like popular because they're making great music rather than they're like a great social media personality.
Right. Where do you fall on social media? Are you on your own accounts? Do you talk to people or is it a bit more hands off?
No, I do all my own accounts and stuff with, work closely with my manager on all of it and stuff. And I think it's really important to like to be like talking to people directly. I think that when like all these things started becoming popular, there were a lot of companies who were like doing people's social media accounts and stuff. And you could always tell when that was happening because they just couldn't really get the tone of voice right. I think people are getting better at that now, i.e. outside companies are. But I think it's really important to kind of be on your own socials because I think people can really sort of see through that. But yeah, I mean, I'm like not a huge fan of social media, but I think that you can't not be on it really.
Right.
I think it's, I like it for certain things. Like I definitely, Instagram, for example, like visually, I get loads of good ideas on like designers and things like that via... talking about graphic designers,
sure.
Come across lots of people by, being linked from other people's accounts or, so I think it can be really productive and it is cool how you can sort of like directly reach out to artists, so it sort of democratizes things. My issue with it, I guess, is that like, I want the people that do well to be the best artists rather than the best people at social media, and some people are just good at gaming that system. Yeah. But I think, it's especially dangerous when you sort of think about it in a sort of political sense because people can, I think some of the people that are generating, let's say, extreme right-wing content for the sake of it, I mean, I'm sure there's extreme left-wing content somewhere on the internet too. Those people, I think, often aren't necessarily like fully believing what they're writing. I think they're like, sometimes they're just doing it in order to build their following and be extreme because they know that gets a reaction.
Absolutely.
And I guess the reaction can be positive or negative. I guess they're just seeing like 1,000 comments, that's
well,
a good.
it's, I mean, they don't. That's the thing. They see the comments. I don't think they really care whether the reaction is positive or negative, and I think that's the danger of it. But I wanted to go back to something you said a second ago when you were talking about some of the positive aspects and how you would get inspiration, from certain graphic designers that you'd see on Instagram, that sort of thing. And I wanted to talk just for a second about your songwriting, because we talked about, we've talked a lot actually about the graphic design and the aesthetic of your projects. And I talked earlier about how there's this sort of, to me, this sort of very simple but very powerful aesthetic in a lot of the design elements of what you do. But I think that actually carries through to your songwriting as well. And I don't know if you see that line as well, but I just wanted to talk about, just in general, over time, how do you think your songwriting has evolved? You mentioned, you now have a bunch more hardware in the studio. But, for you, like when you sit down to write a song, do you always start in the same place? Is your process the same? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's interesting, man. I actually do think that maybe there is like a certain, that's the first time someone said that to me, but maybe there is a certain like kind of deliberate like simplicity with my sort of productions. I think that the kind of ultimate goal sometimes is just to kind of like achieve what the song should be doing with the fewest amount of ingredients sometimes, you know, because complexity is sort of important, but it's also kind of something you can sort of hide behind a little bit sometimes. And certainly like it's the sort of thing you do when you start producing is you make a tune with like 10 different riffs in it, and it's sort of just a bit much to take in. Yeah.
I definitely used to do that.
Yeah, I think as you sort of mature a bit, you kind of, I mean, some of my favorite dance music is just amazing, like brilliantly simple. It's like a scientific theory when you come up, like the best ones are always really like simplistic kind of thing. I love it when dance music has just has like a few elements. I guess it's about having the confidence and the sort of chops to make each element like sort of be strong enough in its own right to sort of so that I guess that's like definitely something I sort of like strive for within my productions. But in terms of process, I often like would start with chords and go from there, because that sort of dictates quite a lot about what type of song it's going to be, or it could be the bass notes of the chords. There's sort of certain like chord patterns that I'll hear in other music, and I'll sort of be like, I kind of like the feel of that chord pattern. Like, let's try doing something like that at a different tempo. That's quite often how I start stuff. So, recently I was working on some stuff which I was like listening to some old like Andrew Weatherall like Primal Scream productions, and the sort of chords and that stuff have a very certain sort of feel to it. So it's like playing around with some ideas, some chords with that kind of feel. So that's tend to be my starting point. And then I guess the same as everybody, like adding drums, layering stuff up. But I mean, I'm like constantly trying to like sort of strip elements away so there's not too much excess sort of stuff that doesn't need to be there, basically.
Yeah, which I think that's a beautiful philosophy, man. And it's, are you the kind of person where do you finish a song in a day, or do you tinker over a song for months?
I think it completely varies. Like some of the more like club stuff that I've done has like, I've done the writing for it really quickly, because sometimes you're just in a kind of vibe and things sort of write themselves quickly. But I'd say that I never really finish something start to finish in a day, because there's a lot of like finessing of the mix down and stuff like that.
Sure.
I think that's probably the bit of the process I don't like as much, because I definitely prefer the sort of creative and musical side of production to the sort of getting an amazing mix down or something. I'd love it if there was just like somebody if you could like automatically do the mix down, or somebody else would do it for me, to be honest. But I've always, I mean, I guess the thing is I've always done all of my tracks myself, sort of thing. Like apart from if I'm writing with somebody else, but I've always like produced and
Sure.
written and engineered them and things like that.
Because there are people you could send your stuff to be mixed. Is it just that you don't think anyone else could really see it the way you see it?
I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of open to that in the future. I think that it's interesting, like I think that that's a kind of hangover possibly from me, like coming up in like the sort of drum and bass scene and stuff. I think there's very much like a taboo of anybody else like helping you write something for some reason. Whereas I think when I kind of came to America and started talking to producers, you sort of realize that there's a lot more, you know, there's quite a lot of ghostwriting and things like that, and like people behind the scenes who are just like, you know, mixing people's stuff, that type of thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, really.
I don't either.
But it's just not something I've personally done yet.
Have you done that for anyone else? Have you assisted on any other artists? You don't have to like name it if you don't want to, but I'm just curious if you've been involved with it from the other
I haven't
side.
done like ghostwriting for dance music. I did a bit of I've done some sort of like pop production and stuff. I had like I did a track with Example years ago.
Right.
Do you know that guy?
Yeah, I know Example, absolutely.
Yeah, UK rapper. We had like a number 3 hit in the UK charts actually with it. It's a track called Kickstart. So I've dabbled in like production for other people, and that's like something that I'm sort of getting back into a little bit now. Now I've got a bit more time on my hands, because it kind of allows me to like write, you know, lots of different genre stuff without having to sort of put that out under the Sub Focus name. And I think the more, you know, like I was talking to you about earlier, I sort of feel the need to kind of, I want to sort of like double down on the kind of more club sort of side of the sort of Sub Focus stuff. I kind of want to, I want to define more what that sound is, rather than doing loads of different sort of tempo stuff under that name. I'm really like enjoying writing sort of drum bass stuff at the moment. I think it's all about kind of just having avenues for me to sort of like do other stuff that fit well, you know, like whether it's be writing house music under an alias or writing like more like commercial stuff for other artists without people knowing that it's me doing it. You know, I think I think that's kind of like how I want to run stuff moving forward, and you know, like double down more on the drum bass side of the Sub Focus stuff.
Yeah. I mean, is that the way your mind works? Is that what keeps it exciting for you? Is always, you know, once you've finished the project you're working on, is trying to figure out, you know, okay, what's next? What are we doing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's I can't remember who said this, but it's quite often like I think each album that you do as an artist is kind of a reaction to the last one, you know? So yeah, I'm just figuring out what like the next one should sound like, but there's a lot of music that I've kind of got that I've written for it already. And yeah, just sort of getting that together. But I was, before the pandemic hit, I was supposed to be doing a new version of my live show. So that is kind of like also, I think, inspiring me to write music, because I'm sort of thinking about when eventually we're hopefully on the other side of this pandemic. I'm just imagining being at this show and playing this stuff for the first time. So I think that's also something that's leading me to sort of take it down quite a kind of underground, more clubby route again.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, talking about the underground, the clubby sounds, and talking about now that you have this history as an artist, right? You have all these albums, and each one affects the next one if it is a reaction, like we were saying. And it makes me think about, you know, your early music before you had a track record, right? Like if we think about like X-Ray, which I think is, you know, one of the first songs that really a lot of people heard, right? And turned a lot of new people on to you. You know, if you look back at a song like that, what were you thinking about when you make a song like that, when you don't have so much of a history to react and pivot off of?
I don't know. I can't really remember what I was thinking. I think I just felt like it sounded quite new when I was writing it, and I definitely felt like excited by it. I think that sort of whole kind of like riffier side of drum and bass had just sort of started, really. So it was good timing. I guess like, Pendulum were really like, had just sort of come through at that point, and I was probably like inspired by what they were doing. And I think that was a really cool time because the kind of production quality of drum and bass like hugely leaped forward at that point. I think when Pendulum started, like Noisia was starting to release their first music, and
was that due to like a technology advancement? Was it just due to sort of a mindset shift in the collective consciousness? What do you think that was?
I think there was. Yeah, I think that all of us who sort of came through that time, like Chase and Status included as well, that sort of group of us were basically the first sort of generation of people to really be just using computers to make music. So all of the people that we were meeting who were like legends of the sort of previous generation of producers were all like based using, they were using like hardware samplers and stuff like that. So they, and big mixing desks. So a lot of them, there was a sort of period where a lot of those people were like actually struggling to adapt to like the new sort of way of making music, which, you could only, like VSTs and plugins and stuff only really started kind of coming into use, I think, like post sort of 2000, I think. Yeah. I don't really know. I mean, I had a really, I think that was the sort of time I started using plugins, basically. It was like 2001, 2002. And that completely meant that you could basically write music from start to finish just in the computer. So I think that was, and then a couple of years later, all of the people that had started doing that to begin with and were just like sort of digital natives, basically. I think that definitely like turned a lot more people onto it, because I remember like friends of mine when I was younger, like a lot of drum and bass sounded very like dirty and sort of like crusty and stuff. And that was kind of the appeal of it. But I think that was a turn off for some people. So I think that has definitely been one of the sort of things that I've probably helped to sort of popularize in a way in the genre, is just like that kind of more like clean production.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about that, but you're absolutely right. And it's funny to hear you say that now you've sort of started incorporating and bringing back more hardware and more of kind of the older technological inspirations into the studio.
Yeah, I think it's just like, you definitely do get different ideas from, like I've got a big modular synth next to me here. It definitely makes you think about music making in a different way. I think there's a lot of exchange between the two things though. I mean, I'm noticing a lot of things that I have been like doing with the modular for the last few years. You can now see ideas from in like the new Ableton updates, for example. I think it's interesting to sort of play with both, and it's obviously nice to have something that's like physically in your hand to play with.
And that goes back to Portals too, right? Because you guys were using a lot of, actual physical instruments for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of, I think like our initial thought when we were putting the album together was like, we should do something that's more sort of ambitious than a collection of dancehall tunes. And we would also like, me and Mark Wilkinson were just basically like talking and referencing a lot of the same kind of albums, like people like Bonobo, John Hopkins, Jamie XX, Fortet. And so we were sort of thinking, let's do a studio retreat and kind of create a lot of raw materials, do a lot of acoustic recordings to start off the process. And I definitely think, we went to an amazing studio, went to Real World Studios, which is Peter Gabriel's studio. And it's an incredible building. It's like basically this old sort of mill building and they've sort of renovated. So it's got huge windows overlooking a lake. So it's an incredible room to work in. And we just set up all these different recording stations around us. Mark's a drummer, so we set up a drum kit behind us. I set up on my modular on one side. And yeah, we sort of recorded bass, guitars, grand piano. We met a cellist one day that we persuaded to come and record some parts for us with. So yeah, it was a great experience, and like it kind of gave the album like a really kind of nice like palette of sounds, because we had those live strings and like live piano and stuff.
Right. And those, I think we touched on this earlier, when you make those kinds of choices, that can inform, you make one strong creative decision, like we're going to incorporate acoustic instruments. And then all of a sudden, the way the rest of it should sound becomes a lot more clear, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess it's like a sequence of decisions that you make, and yeah, we were sort of like, we were actually debating whether or not to like go somewhere, like go on a studio retreat to like Scandinavia or somewhere quite like isolated.
Right.
But then I think I was like trying to engineer it so that we stayed in England, because I think we wanted to, what I was really worried about is you sort of spend loads of money on a studio and then you sort of sit there and don't feel very inspired because you're being forced to create something. So one of the things we really wanted to do is kind of like bring people with us, like people that we wrote vocals with in the past and stuff, and people that could play instruments really well. And so we surrounded ourselves with like a little crew of musicians. We worked with the house producers Icarus.
Oh yeah.
On Just Hold On. We worked with a guy called Tom Havelock, who's a vocalist that we've both done a few things with. He also wrote Generate with Eric Prydz.
Oh, great.
So yeah, there were a few different people that we brought down on some days to work with us, and it was just a really sort of nice creative environment. The funny thing about it was that once we'd recorded certain parts, because it's like quite hard to, because you have to sort of like, there's a lot more care that goes into recording like a grand piano part, for example. So it sort of makes you, and you can kind of remember where you recorded it and stuff. So it makes you much more attached to the bits that you record. Whereas when you were in DAW and you're just like adding synth parts all the time, you're much more likely to sort of just like bin something off if it's not working. Whereas this, you kind of really work with the parts that you've recorded,
because you're attached to it. There's already a memory attached to it, right? And I think that's the strongest, the most meaningful pieces of music in our lives. The reason they're meaningful is because they have memories attached to them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, it's mad. It's like the whole album has been a really good experience for me. And I think like part of that is just my memory of the studio sessions, which is obviously hard for other people to appreciate. But
I think
we've tried to sort of share
through,
bits and bobs of it online and things like that to sort of show people a bit of behind the scenes and stuff.
Well, and this may be a little woo-woo, but I think some of that comes through in the music, right? There's some essence of that experience and the way you felt about it at the time that is reflected in the music that people hear, right? Even if they don't know it instinctively. Yeah,
sure. And I think also like coming back from an experience like that, feeling, you just feel super inspired. And I think that really sort of helped us to get the tracks to a point, because they were all quite rough when we finished the sessions, because we were kind of just trying to get as much material done as possible. So lots of them have had different drops, or the drums sounded like shit, or there was lots of stuff to kind of fix when we took them out of there. But then the lockdown happened, and then we suddenly had a lot of time to do that.
Yeah, then you got all the time in the world. Well, look, man, I've taken up a lot of your time. I don't want to take up too much more, but before we get out of here, if you're down for it, I wanted to do just a very quick little speed round, because not only have you not done a ton of remixes in your career, but a lot of the ones you have done, I think, have been really impactful or really interesting. So if you're down for it, I'm just going to throw a couple of them at you and just tell me what you remember about it, what it meant to you, that kind of thing.
Yeah, of course, man.
And let's start off with the early one that I think a lot of people are familiar with, which is your remix for The Prodigy, "Smack My Bitch Up."
Yeah, that was crazy. So I just put out X-Ray, and that was starting to do well. That was kind of my breakthrough tune. And it was mad because The Prodigy were like, I heard that they were looking for remixes, but basically loads of different producers started doing these remixes. So it almost became like a remix competition amongst established producers. So for ages, I really didn't think it was going to happen, because there were lots of other remixes in play. Yeah, fortunately, they really liked mine, and it went ahead. But yeah, it was an amazing moment, man, because it was, super early on in my career, and to, be getting like, I think Liam emailed me just saying "Wicked Remix" or something, and that was just like such a buzz at that time.
Yeah, I mean, especially if they were an early inspiration to then actually connect. I mean, that's
big time, man. Yeah, I mean, they pretty much they're one of the main acts that got me into dance music in the first place.
So, I mean, not to mention that song. I mean, that's ostensibly their biggest song they've ever had, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. No, it was an absolute honor. It was great that it worked out. But yeah, it was crazy. I actually had to. None of us had the original parts to the songs because I imagine they just got kind of like, you don't always necessarily have the parts to your old projects, whatever.
Oh yeah, so you didn't have the stems or anything.
No, so I kind of remade a lot of the parts, and then I ended up hitting up. I found out that DJ Hype had done a remix of "Smack My Bitch Up" in like the mid-90s. So I got in touch with him, and he managed to somehow dig out some of the parts, the original parts that Liam had sent him back then. Which is pretty crazy. So
give yourself a little leg up, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, how about this one was impactful for me, and I think, to bring it back to the United States, I think this was everywhere in the States in the late 2000s, was your Rusko remix for "Hold On."
Yeah, it's mad how I think that song has been like amazing for me in the States, because I think I didn't really kind of realize like how sort of big that tune got, but it was
massive, man.
It definitely became like a real sort of big crossover tune for me out in America. I'm really grateful for like how that was received. I guess I was just wanting to take the kind of the really cool vocal in the original, but like, and then have like a real massive switch, and that's sort of how I arrived at what the tune sounded like. But yeah, it's really cool to see that one grow. I didn't really expect that at all.
Yeah. Well, and Rusko, I think, you were talking about your start, and, that Pendulum and some others were sort of pioneering this new idea about drum and bass, this new aesthetic, making it bigger, more colorful. And to me, that's sort of what Rusko did for dubstep in a way.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, you're right. I think that he kind of, you definitely call his stuff colourful, wouldn't you? It's kind of really sort of, just using like brighter sort of sounds. I mean, I loved like the tunes like Cockney Thug when that came out.
Oh, yeah.
That was like one of the first sort of tunes in that area that I was like, wow, that's really something different. So yeah, he's made some amazing stuff.
Absolutely. All right, moving on to another big tune. You landed on a bunch of big tunes, man. Deadmau5, Ghosts and stuff.
Yeah, so yeah, it's really cool to get to do this one. I guess I was just like fortunate to sort of be in the right place at the right time. I think me and Nero both did remixes of this, and I think we were both literally like working on them in next door studios. Their studio was literally right next door to mine. Obviously we did quite different work on them, but yeah, it's super cool to get involved in like what is like one of his probably most well-known songs, I guess, or certainly was back then.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think it's cool for him too, because I think there's stylistically for Deadmau5, there's not a ton of official reinterpretations that go as far afield as yours does. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, he's done such a lot for sort of dance music in general. It's mad, like his stuff just did sound really different when it was coming through. I remember hearing like I Remember for the first time.
Oh man, yeah.
And just thinking like that is really like, I don't know. I think his stuff just sounded really like new school. The production at the time just didn't sound like anything people were making at the time. It was sort of a real step up, I think.
Yeah, and that's one of those things, you know it when you hear it, man. So that, for me, that's the most exciting thing. I think that's a DJ thing, is just that excitement of hearing something you haven't heard before.
Yeah, big time. I think he's done... I really like his sort of work with like chords and melody and stuff. There's loads of Demas tunes that I definitely really rate.
100%, man. Yeah. Well, and I mean, as we're kind of bringing it home here, you know, for you, what keeps you here? What's the most exciting thing? What's the most fun thing about what you're doing? You know, what do you look forward to?
Yeah. I definitely think it's really important to kind of keep yourself energized, because you can sort of really tell, I think, when people sort of are not excited by what they're making anymore, you know. So I'm really, really mindful to kind of make sure that whatever I'm putting out I feel really strongly about, and I think is high quality. So I'm always trying to keep myself excited and inspired and stuff. I think that just when you make a new piece of music in the studio and it starts to click, that's always a really, really satisfying moment. And just imagining the sort of places that you're going to play that in and the sort of feeling that you're going to give people is really exciting, and it kind of doesn't get old, really. But I think that you know, personally, I feel like it's always when I've done something that feels like a kind of step on from what I've done before. You know, sometimes you can make tunes and they feel like similar to what you've done before. And then every so often you make something that feels like a development. So those things are all really exciting. But I think a lot of the time when I'm trying to motivate myself to write music, and it's imagining like playing them in a certain place, that's quite often like a sort of mental exercise that like gets me really excited about songs.
That's beautiful, man. And I think that's great, because that's both a beautiful thought and also a very practical tip for any producers out there listening who may encounter those same problems. Because that's all it is, man, is you got to remember what you're doing it for, and where people are going to hear it, and the environment, and what that's going to feel like. And if you can, I might be reaching, but to bring it full circle, I mean, that's escapism, right? Is you transport yourself mentally to this world where this art that you're working on in the moment is going to live, right?
Yeah, sure. I think it's just like, that feeling when you're like hearing something you haven't heard before on the dance floor for the first time, and it's exciting giving that to other people and thinking like, what like crazy sound could I introduce now, or how are these chords, what kind of atmosphere will these chords create, you know? Yeah, it's like a buzz, basically creating escapism for other people.
Yeah, God, that's beautiful, man. I think that's a great note to leave it off on. I mean, is there anything we didn't talk about? Anything else that is on your mind? Anything you want to let people know before we get out of here?
No. I mean, that's everything. Just go check out Portals by me and Wilkinson, my new album that's just come out. That's about it.
Awesome, man. Well, I really enjoyed talking to you. I appreciate your time, man. This was super fun.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Good to connect, and I hope to like actually meet you in real life next time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Next time we're all traveling again. Yeah, let's get dinner or something. Take care, man.
Take it easy, man. Peace.
All right, that's the show. Shout out to Subfocus. Great to have you on, man. For everybody listening, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Don't forget Portals, the new album from Subfocus and Wilkinson. It's out right now. You can also go grab his new collabs with Netsky and another one with Machine Drum. If you're in New Zealand, go check him out on tour over New Year's. And if you're in the States, stay tuned. Watch out for his Worship Collective with him, Culture Shock, 19 1991, and Dimension. Once shows come back, I'm sure they will be back in your neck of the woods. My name is Willy Joy. You can keep up with me at Willy Joy or at BackToBackPod on all social media, or you can email me backtobackpod@gmail.com. You can also come join the Back to Back Discord. Come chat with me. Come say hi. Come tell me what's going on in your life, where you're at, what you're up to, what you're thinking, what you're working on. If you make some music, come share it. All that good shit. The link is in the description of this episode. That's it for this week. Look, like I said in the intro to this show, I don't know what's going on right now, but amazing guest after amazing guest is hitting me up to come on the show. I've been recording some really exciting episodes. The year is not over yet. That's all I'm going to say. Stay tuned, stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, stay indoors. How about that? Take care of yourself, protect the people around you. That's what I am wishing for you this week, and I will talk to you next Tuesday. For Back to Back, this is Willy Joy. Peace.